Mr Speaker.
I call Alfred Naro.
Mr Speaker, the greatest disappointment is actually when that member continues to go on about child poverty. The greatest disappointment, Mr Speaker, is when that member basically is saying to the whole of New Zealand that if you're impoverished, then you're more likely to abuse your kids, to neglect your kids. Now, I tell you that is a speech that most of New Zealand needs to know, that is putting the blame on that. Mr Speaker, and here's the reasons why. And this speaker, the member there that spoke, didn't like this, but when the Children's Commissioner came to provide a submission at the Select Committee, Dr Russell Wills, this is what he said, and he's part of the Child Poverty Action Group that goes around and is talking about this issue. Dr Russell Wills said this: poverty is the secondary issue. The issue around vulnerable children is absolutely important. The direction of this bill is important. Its focus is important. Its intentionality to address the core issues is absolutely important. So we now have the Children's Commissioner who is stating that really clearly. I'll say it again. He said poverty is the secondary issue, vulnerability, neglect and abuse is the critical issue. And here's the reasons why that he gave that. Because the reality is, abuse and neglect has no ethnicity tag. It has no socioeconomic tag. We cannot go out and say, the fact is, because you're impoverished, you're more likely to abuse and neglect your kids. I can tell you this, if you go into any community and you say that, okay, you'll see that the fact that those communities will rise up and condemn any person that would say this. So this is what's happening. It's not rubbish, it's the truth. So back in the early, when the Honourable Steve Mahari was the Minister of Social Development, I was part of the NGO sector that turned around and after the Mick Brown report was putting together what we called the blueprint. The blueprint was the intentionality of bringing all of the sectors together, because in the report it talked about there were siloed operations. There was a lack of champions, there was a lack of commitment to responsibility of the issues around abuse and neglect and vulnerability of our children in the sector. So what this bill has done is it's at the heart of that. Now, I've got to tell you, and Dr Prasad knows this, those recommendations were never upheld and they were never taken on board. But what this minister has done is that, number one, it's taken one of the core principles that came out of those recommendations, leadership. She's taken the core out of that leadership to ensure that we have accountability and responsibility. The Vulnerable Children's Bill is about responsibility. It's about being accountable to New Zealanders, about the importance of vulnerable children and neglect that happens in our community. So this is the things that's important. So it's at the highest level. There are 5 chief executives of 5 key government departments that are held accountable. Why is that important? Because that accountability is about their responsibility, about government responsibility. Mr Speaker, can I also say this? The responsibility of addressing the issue of abuse and neglect in our communities is not just government. That last speaker from the Greens keeps talking about government responsibility, but is afraid to front up to our communities and talk about also to community responsibility. We know what we need to be responsible for. This bill has done that. We know that it has the support of the Labour Party, and we know the fact is that it's being responsible. The thing about the Green Party, what it's wanting to do and say, it's all saying that the responsibility of care, of abuse and neglect is entirely about the government and not about community. We think that this is a very good bill. It's comprehensive, 115 submissions, 62 oral submissions. We've worked constructively, collectively together. We have the support also too of the Labour caucus to ensure that this bill absolutely fulfils its primary obligation around abuse and neglect of our vulnerable children in New Zealand. Mr Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Ko Wasanati Lolo Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. For the minute and a half that's actually left,